Anxiety is the work of the devil. Geronda. Lay people who live a spiritual life tell us that when they return home at night all tired, they have difficulty saying the apodapnon, and this upsets them. When they come home at night from work and feel tired, they should never pressure themselves and become anxious. Instead, they should always say to themselves with Philorimo, if you cannot read the entire apodapnon, read just half or 1/3 of it, and then they should try not to get too tired during the day. They should strive spiritually as much as they can, and do so with Philorimo, entrusting everything to God, and God will act. The mind should always be close to God. This is the best form of study. Geronda. What does God think of intense ascetic discipline? If it is done from Philorimo, people feel great joy. God also rejoices in the Philorimo of his children. A heart that is bursting with love drips honey, but if it is full of egoism, it is tormented. Once, a person who had been trying hard but in an egotistical way was so overwhelmed with anxiety that he cried out, "O Christ, how narrow have you made the gate? I cannot get through." If he had struggled with humility, he would have fit. The efforts of those who fast, do vigils, and so on, but are full of egoism, lead nowhere. They receive no spiritual benefit whatsoever, because instead of throwing punches at the demons, they are beating the air. Instead of chasing away temptations, they receive more. They meet with great difficulties in their struggle and feel overwhelmed by anxiety. By contrast, those who trust God and strive much with humility and hope are filled with joy. Their hearts rejoice and their souls soar. We must be careful with our spiritual lives. When spiritual people are affected by vainglory, they feel very little satisfaction and are left with a sense of emptiness in their souls. Their hearts feel empty and do not flutter and leap, and as their vanity increases, the emptiness inside makes them suffer even more. Where there is anxiety and despair, the demons are at work in one's spiritual life. You should not feel anxiety about anything. Anxiety is the work of the devil. Wherever you see anxiety, be certain that the devil is involved. The devil is not a contrarian. If there is already a certain tendency in us, he will push us in that direction in order to cause us trouble and deceive us. For example, he makes a sensitive person hypersensitive. When you feel like making prostrations, the devil pushes you to make more than you can endure. If you're not very strong, you feel nervous and guilty because you cannot do enough. You feel anxious and desperation sets in, mild at first and then worse. I remember when I was a novice, before I would go to bed, the tempter, the devil, would say to me, "Are you falling asleep? Get up. So many people are suffering and so many are in need." I used to get up and do as many prostrations as I could. Again, I would try to sleep, and again the devil would start. "Others are suffering and you are sleeping. Get up." I would again get up. I reached the point where I thought to myself, if only I could lose my legs, I would have a good excuse not to do prostrations. Once, I barely made it through Great Lent because I tried to push myself more than I could take. When we feel anxiety in our spiritual struggle, we must know that we are not moving within the realm of God. God is not a stifling tyrant. We should all strive with Philorimo and according to our strength. It is by cultivating Philorimo that we grow in our love of God. When our efforts are driven by Philorimo, our prostrations and fasting will be pure outbursts of love, and our path one of spiritual valor. In other words, we should not be pedantic, rigidly stressing minor things in our struggle and suffocate from anxiety, struggling with various thoughts. We should simplify our efforts and put all our hope in Christ, rather than in ourselves. Christ is full of love, kindness, and consolation. He will never stifle us. He gives us abundant oxygen and divine comfort. There is a clear difference between the kind of spiritual work that is prudent and deep, and the kind that is characterized by an unhealthy fastidiousness and over-scrupulousness. Being full of internal anxiety, this second kind of spiritual work suffocates and represses us. Its external and indiscriminate pressure is like a migraine beating inside our heads. Geronda. How should a person who is by nature a thinker and exerts pressure on himself avoid becoming overwhelmed? If he remains simple, he will not get tired. But if there is egoism, no matter how small, then one wants to do everything to perfection and tries to avoid mistakes at any cost. This is why even the slightest mistake makes him tired. A mistake here and there will not hurt, even if one gets a little reprimand for it. Your question, for example, applies better to a judge who constantly has to face difficult cases and is afraid that he might give the wrong judgment and cause innocent souls to be punished. In the spiritual life, a person who has many responsibilities gets a headache when she runs into an impasse. This happens when her decisions affect others and she must make sure that no one is wronged. In other words, this kind of problem arises when our conscience is constantly being challenged. You must be very careful, sister, to live the spiritual life with your heart rather than your mind, and never do a job without first putting your trust in God with great humility. Otherwise, you will agonize over it and end up exhausting your mind and soul. Usually, it is lack of faith that hides behind agony, but pride can cause agony too.